Formula One contracts are basically fancy toilet paper. They're expensive, look official, and teams will throw them out the moment something better comes along. This sport has turned betrayal into a legitimate business strategy, complete with secret midnight meetings, staged crashes, and enough corporate espionage to make the KGB proud. We're talking about drivers who'll announce they're leaving via social media, just to watch their bosses have public meltdowns. Grab your popcorn because we're about to witness mid-season switches, secret signings, industrial espionage, and team order mutinies that'll make your head spin. And we're starting with the most twisted logic in motorsport history, where surviving a fiery crash somehow makes you the villain. The safety betrayal, when not dying makes you a traitor. Picture this. You literally catch fire at 180 miles per hour, survive looking like a horror movie extra, then get called a traitor for not wanting to die for a trophy. This is peak F1 logic right here. Niki Lauda's Nürburgring crash in 1976 turned him into a human barbecue, but somehow that wasn't the most shocking part of this story. The Austrian got roasted alive in his Ferrari, spent weeks in hospital looking like he'd been through a blender, then had the balls to return just 42 days later at Monza and finish fourth. But apparently surviving and racing again wasn't enough commitment for Ferrari. The real betrayal came when Lauda pulled out of the season finale at Fuji because of dangerous conditions, and Enzo Ferrari basically called him a coward. Ferrari's logic was simple. Championships are forever, but apparently so is being dead, which Lauda found slightly problematic. The man had just survived what should have been a fatal crash, and Ferrari's response was essentially, get back in there and die for us properly this time. The Italian press went absolutely mental, painting Lauda as someone who abandoned the sacred duty of risking everything for racing glory. Ferrari even started shopping for replacement drivers like Carlos Reutemann behind Lauda's back, because nothing says loyalty like having backup plans for your nearly dead employee. Lauda proved the ultimate revenge by winning the 1977 championship anyway, then leaving Ferrari entirely. Sometimes the best betrayal is just being better than everyone who betrayed you first. But speaking of career moves that destroy your current employer, some drivers have turned secret negotiations into an art form. The secret deal, Senna's midnight McLaren heist. Ayrton. Senna proved that sometimes the best career move is corporate espionage disguised as contract negotiations. The Brazilian was stuck at Lotus in 1987, watching McLaren dominate with Honda engines while he collected moral victories and participation trophies. Senna was driving his heart out in an increasingly uncompetitive car, basically playing Formula One on hard mode, while everyone else had cheat codes enabled. So Senna did what any rational person would do. He started secretly dating McLaren while still living with Lotus, like some sort of motorsport love triangle. Senna and Ron Dennis held clandestine talks in 1987, with basement bar handshakes becoming part of the lore, which explains why Lotus was completely blindsided. The Honda angle made this even juicier. Senna signed specifically for the chance to race with a McLaren Honda package, knowing that combination would be unstoppable. This wasn't just losing a driver. This was watching your power supplier walk out the door, holding hands with your star employee. Lotus staff learned about their star driver's departure from the press, which is simply lovely. Nothing says professional courtesy like reading about your future in the morning newspaper alongside the sports scores. Senna's McLaren move delivered 3 championships, while Lotus's fortunes nosedived without Honda support. The McLaren-Honda partnership dominated 1988, proving that sometimes betrayal is just good career planning. The whole saga showed that in F1, loyalty lasts exactly as long as your current contract, and maybe not even that long when better opportunities start whispering sweet nothings in your ear. But Senna wasn't the first driver to treat team contracts like suggestions rather than actual commitments. The original sin, Fangio's mid-season masterclass in betrayal. Juan Manuel Fangio wrote the original playbook for F1 betrayals back in 1954, when contracts were apparently just friendly suggestions with expensive letterheads. Fangio was happily winning races for Maserati when Mercedes showed up with their revolutionary W196 and basically said, "Wanna win more?" The German team had built what looked like a spaceship compared to everyone else's horse-drawn carriages, and Fangio wasn't blind to the obvious upgrade opportunity. When Fangio test drove the Mercedes at the Nürburgring, he was instantly 2 seconds faster per lap than anything else on the grid. This wasn't a marginal gain. This was like bringing a rocket to a bicycle race. Fangio realized his Maserati contract was more of a guideline than an actual rule, and made the switch mid-season. The Italian press went absolutely nuclear, dubbing him Il Traditore, the traitor, because apparently switching jobs for better equipment is considered treason in Italy. Fangio's response was peak professional athlete logic. He raced to win, not to make friends, which is basically the F1 equivalent of it's not personal, it's business. He proceeded to dominate at the French Grand Prix at Reims in his Mercedes debut, then won races across 2 different teams that season, which is like changing restaurants mid-meal and still getting a Michelin star. The FIA was so shocked by this display of mid-season job switching that rules were tightened after 1954 to stop team hopping, making Fangio the reason we can't have nice things. This established the fundamental F1 truth. Loyalty is inversely proportional to how much faster the other guy's car is, but sometimes drivers get this calculation spectacularly wrong. The Honey Badger's epic miscalculation. Daniel Ricciardo pulled off the rare achievement of betraying a winning team to join a losing one, which is like leaving a 5-star restaurant to eat at a gas station. This man managed to trade guaranteed success for expensive disappointment. In 2018, Ricciardo was winning races at Red Bull, but got tired of being Max Verstappen's supporting actor, so he decided to write his own story at Renault on a 2-year deal starting in 2019. The Australian was done playing second fiddle and wanted a fresh start somewhere else, which sounds romantic until you realize the movie turned out to be a disaster film. The move looked brilliant on paper. Factory team, French engines, unlimited wine, except for the tiny detail that Renault was slower than a mobility scooter in a school zone. From regular podiums at Red Bull to fewer podiums at Renault, the move didn't produce the wins he expected. Ricciardo went from regular podium visits to celebrating points finishes like they were championship wins, which is the motorsport equivalent of career regression therapy. Meanwhile, Red Bull kept winning races and eventually championships, proving that sometimes the grass isn't greener, it's just more expensive. The Honey Badger's smile got progressively more forced as he realized he'd traded race wins for really good catering and a nicer motorhome. Ricciardo's Renault adventure became a cautionary tale about leaving guaranteed success for potential glory, especially when that potential turns out to be imaginary. This betrayal was unique because Ricciardo mainly betrayed himself, which is somehow even more painful to watch than regular backstabbing. But at least Ricciardo's self-sabotage was unintentional. Some F1 betrayals happen when you put 2 championship drivers in the same team and watch them destroy each other on purpose. The McLaren Civil War, when teammates become war criminals. The Senna-Prost rivalry at McLaren was like putting 2 alpha wolves in the same cage and expecting them to share their food nicely. This wasn't just teammate competition, this was full-scale psychological warfare with million-dollar budgets. McLaren had the brilliant idea of pairing 2 of the greatest drivers ever in the same team, which worked about as well as you'd expect from housing 2 massive egos in one garage. Both drivers wanted to be the number 1, both had championship-winning talent, and neither was particularly interested in playing nice for the cameras. The 1989 and 1990 seasons turned into mind games, team favoritism accusations, and 2 season-ending Suzuka collisions that turned teammates into bitter rivals. At Suzuka 1989, they crashed into each other while fighting for the championship, with Senna getting excluded from the results and Prost taking the title. The following year at the same track, Senna took out Prost at the first corner to secure his own championship in the most controversial fashion possible. Ron Dennis tried playing peacekeeper between 2 drivers who treated each other like competing mafia families, but managing these egos was like mediating a divorce while both parties still lived in the same house. The team boss later admitted both drivers broke confidences and shared blame for the toxic atmosphere. By the end of 1990, the situation was so poisonous that Prost basically said he couldn't work with this lunatic and left for Ferrari, which is like quitting your job by moving to your boss's biggest rival. The McLaren Civil War proved that even the most dominant teams can implode when you put 2 championship-caliber egos in the same space. But sometimes the betrayal isn't about ego clashes. Sometimes it's about contracts becoming so complicated that nobody knows who actually employs who anymore. Button's contract chaos. Musical chairs with lawyers. Jenson Button's 2004 contract situation proved that F1 legal battles can be more entertaining than the actual racing. Button had signed with Williams for 2005, but BAR Honda wasn't ready to let their star driver walk away without a fight. Both teams claimed they owned Button's services, which created the kind of legal mess that makes divorce lawyers weep with joy. The Contracts Recognition Board stepped in to sort out this expensive clusterfuck and ruled in October 2004 that Button was legally bound to bar for 2005, despite Williams waving around what they thought was a valid contract. Williams had spent months planning their 2005 season around Button, only to discover their agreement wasn't worth the expensive paper it was printed on. Barr's victory came at a cost. They had to compensate Williams for their trouble, turning Button into the most expensive driver transfer that wasn't technically a transfer. The whole saga proved that in F1, having a contract doesn't guarantee you actually have a contract, especially when another team's lawyers get involved. Button stayed at Bar Honda and later joined the rebranded Braun GP team, where he won the 2009 championship. Sometimes legal chaos works out perfectly, assuming you can afford the lawyers their bills and don't mind spending months not knowing where you'll be working next year. The button contract wars showed that F1 teams will fight over drivers like divorced parents fighting over custody, except with more money and better lawyers. But sometimes the betrayal goes beyond contract disputes into full-scale industrial espionage. Spygate, the $100 million photocopy scandal. In 2007, a Ferrari mechanic decided to play international spy and leak 780 pages of secrets to McLaren, turning Formula One into a real-life episode of Mission Impossible. This wasn't your average workplace betrayal. This was industrial espionage with a budget bigger than most countries' defense spending. Nigel Stepney at Ferrari was apparently bored with just building fast cars and decided to moonlight as a corporate espionage agent. The leaked documents contained everything from technical drawings to strategic plans, basically giving McLaren Ferrari's entire playbook like some sort of motorsport WikiLeaks. Mike Coughlin at McLaren received this treasure trove of classified information and probably felt like he'd won the lottery, except the lottery was illegal and everyone was watching. The FIA investigation uncovered emails, phone records, and enough evidence to make this the most documented betrayal in sporting history. McLaren insisted they hadn't actually used the Ferrari data, but the evidence suggested otherwise, which is like being caught with stolen goods and claiming you were just holding them for a friend. Ferrari was understandably upset about their employee becoming a double agent, while McLaren tried to pretend they had no idea where all this convenient information came from. The September 2007 verdict was brutal. McLaren got hit with a $100 million fine, the largest penalty in sporting history, and lost all their constructors' points for the season. The drivers kept their individual points, but the team's championship dreams were obliterated. Spygate proved that in F1, information is more valuable than gold, and stealing it will cost you more than buying your own team. But sometimes the real enemy isn't the competition outside your garage. The Alonso explosion, threatening your own team. Fernando Alonso managed to make enemies with his own team while fighting a rookie teammate, which is like starting a war on two fronts and expecting to win both. This is what happens when world champions meet reality and decide reality is wrong. Alonso joined McLaren in 2007 expecting to dominate, but found himself matched by some kid named Lewis Hamilton, who apparently didn't get the memo about being intimidated. The two-time world champion probably thought he'd walk into McLaren and crush the rookie like a bug, except the bug had serious pace and zero respect for reputation. The 2007 McLaren pairing of Alonso and Hamilton turned toxic and contributed to internal collapse, with their feud exploding into full-team chaos that made managing the garage feel like hostage negotiation. Alonso's name later appeared in the Spygate probes, and he cooperated with investigators, adding another layer of drama to an already poisonous atmosphere. McLaren found themselves dealing with a two-time world champion having a public meltdown while simultaneously trying to manage a rookie who was actually winning races. The garage atmosphere became so toxic that mechanics probably needed hazmat suits, with Alonso treating his own team like enemy combatants rather than colleagues. The Spanish driver's tantrum reached peak levels when he basically demanded #1 status while everything around him burned. Alonso's McLaren explosion proved that sometimes the enemy is your teammate, especially when egos and expectations collide with reality and nobody wants to back down. But McLaren's internal warfare was nothing compared to what some teams were willing to orchestrate on track itself. Crashgate, the Singapore torpedo strategy. Renault turned Nelson Piquet Jr. into a human missile to win the 2008 Singapore Grand Prix, which is like rigging a casino, except the casino is moving at 200 miles per hour and people could die. This wasn't just cheating, this was weaponizing your own driver for race strategy. The plan was diabolically simple. Piquet Jr. crashed deliberately at turn 17 on lap 14 to trigger a safety car that would hand Fernando Alonso a strategic advantage. The Brazilian driver had to slam into the barriers at exactly the right moment to create the perfect chaos for Alonso's victory from 15th on the grid. Piquet Jr. essentially became a kamikaze pilot for Renault's championship ambitions, sacrificing his own car and safety to manipulate the entire race outcome. The conspiracy involved team principal Flavio Briatore and engineering chief Pat Simons, who orchestrated this automotive heist with enough premeditation to make it feel like organized crime. When Piquet Jr. later testified to the FIA with emails and evidence, the full scope of the betrayal emerged. The investigation revealed that Renault had literally staged an accident to win races, turning competitive strategy into something resembling a criminal enterprise. The consequences were brutal. Briatore received a lifetime ban from the FIA, later overturned on appeal, while Simons got a 5-year suspension. Renault itself received a suspended ban for turning their driver into a weapon of mass destruction. Crashgate proved that some teams will orchestrate disasters to gain advantages, making every suspicious incident in F1 history suddenly look more sinister. But sometimes betrayal doesn't require elaborate elaborate conspiracies. Sometimes drivers just decide that team orders are more like friendly suggestions. Multi-21, when team orders become suggestions. Sebastian Vettel received a team order called Multi-21 and decided it was more of a friendly recommendation, like a speed limit sign that you can ignore if you're feeling adventurous. This is what happens when German precision meets German stubbornness, and the stubbornness wins. At the 2013 Malaysian GP, Red Bull told both drivers to hold positions with Multi-21. Their code, meaning Vettel, shouldn't pass Webber. The team had everything under control, both cars were running well, and they just needed to cruise home for a nice 1-2 finish without any drama. Vettel looked at this instruction, considered it carefully, then completely ignored it and overtook Webber anyway because championships don't win themselves. The radio messages became increasingly desperate as the team watched their carefully planned strategy dissolve into Vettel doing whatever he wanted. Webber's reaction was basically, "Are you kidding me right now?" While the team tried to pretend this wasn't a complete breakdown of authority. The Australian had followed orders like a good soldier, only to watch his teammate throw teamwork out the window for 7 extra points. The post-race interviews were more awkward than a family dinner after a divorce, with everyone trying to smile while clearly wanting to throw punches. The incident increased friction between the drivers and factored into Webber's decision to leave Red Bull for Porsche in 2014, proving that betraying your teammate has consequences beyond just hurt feelings. Multi-21 became motorsport shorthand for ignoring authority when personal ambition calls. Team orders exist until someone decides to change the scoreboard instead. But sometimes betrayal isn't about ignoring orders in the heat of the moment. Hamilton's great escape, the genius betrayal. Sometimes the betrayal is calculated years in advance, like a chess master planning 10 moves ahead. Lewis Hamilton left McLaren for Mercedes in 2013, a move that looked like career suicide but turned out to be the smartest betrayal in F1 history. This wasn't just switching teams, this was gambling your entire legacy on a hunch about regulation changes. Hamilton was comfortable at McLaren, winning races and championships, but Mercedes came calling with promises of future dominance. The British driver had everything he needed at McLaren: proven success, championship-winning machinery, and the respect that comes with being their golden boy since his rookie season. Everyone thought Hamilton had lost his mind. Mercedes was a midfield team at best, and McLaren was still a championship contender with proven success. The move looked like trading a winning lottery ticket for a scratch-off card, especially when Mercedes was struggling to even reach the podium consistently. McLaren fans felt betrayed by their homegrown hero, leaving for what appeared to be a slower car and less competitive environment. Hamilton was essentially betting his entire career on Mercedes' ability to build a dominant car for the new turbo hybrid era starting in 2014, which seemed like wishful thinking at the time. When the 2014 regulations hit, Mercedes dominated so completely that Hamilton's betrayal became the greatest career move in modern F1 history. The German team didn't just win, they absolutely obliterated the competition for years, with Hamilton securing multiple championships that validated his long-term planning. This proved that sometimes betraying your current team is actually just really good strategic thinking, especially when you can see the future better than everyone else. But not every contract dispute ends with championship glory. Sauber versus Van der Garde, contract court battle royale. Some drivers take their contract disputes all the way to the courthouse steps, turning F1 into a legal drama with real consequences. Guido van der Garde took Sauber to court to force them to give him a race seat, which is like suing your way onto a sports team and expecting everyone to be happy about it. This wasn't just a contract dispute, this was turning F1 into a courtroom drama with injunctions and emergency hearings. Van der Garde had a contract for 2015 that Sauber apparently forgot about when they signed 2 other drivers, creating a 3 drivers 2 seats mathematical problem. The Swiss team basically played musical chairs with driver contracts and forgot they'd already promised someone a seat, which is poor planning even by F1 standards. The legal battle escalated when Van der Garde showed up to the Australian GP with court orders demanding his contractually promised seat. The Victorian Supreme Court ruled in his favor, mandating that Sauber allow him to participate in practice, qualifying, and the race, turning the season opener into a legal battleground. Sauber found themselves facing the impossible choice of defying a court order or withdrawing both cars from the race entirely. Team principal Monisha Kaltenborn threatened to pull out completely, while Bernie Ecclestone pressured them to find a resolution or face exclusion from the championship opener. The settlement kept Van der Garde out of the car, but resolved the legal chaos before race day. This mess proved that F1 contracts are serious legal documents that can drag teams into emergency courtrooms at the worst possible moments, not suggestions that disappear when more convenient options appear. But sometimes teams don't need lawyers to create controversy. Sometimes they just need a really good photocopier. Racing Point's Copy-Paste Championship. Racing Point looked at Mercedes' car, hit Ctrl-C and Ctrl-V, then acted shocked when everyone noticed their homework looked suspiciously familiar. This wasn't inspiration. This was straight-up academic dishonesty with million-dollar budgets. The 2020 Racing Point RP20 was so similar to Mercedes' 2019 car that people started calling it the pink Mercedes, which wasn't exactly subtle. The resemblance was so obvious that even casual fans could spot it from the grandstands, which is never a good sign when you're trying to pretend you designed something original. Renault filed a protest claiming Racing Point had basically photocopied Mercedes' brake ducts, turning car development into an intellectual property lawsuit. The FIA investigation revealed enough evidence to suggest Racing Point's engineers had been very thorough students of Mercedes' work, particularly when it came to those rear brake ducts. Racing Point's defense was essentially, we just happened to independently arrive at identical solutions, which is like claiming you accidentally wrote the same essay as your classmate. The team insisted they'd simply studied Mercedes' car from photos and reverse-engineered everything themselves, which sounds plausible until you realize how identical every single detail was. The FIA upheld Renault's protest and hit Racing Point with a €400,000 fine plus a 15-point deduction in the Constructors' Championship. The stewards acknowledged it was impractical to force a complete redesign mid-season, so Racing Point continued using the contested parts while paying the penalty. This scandal proved that there's a difference between learning from others and straight-up copying their homework. But at least Racing Point's betrayal happened behind closed doors. Some drivers prefer to handle their contract disputes in front of the entire world. The Piastri heist, social media, betrayal. Oscar Piastri proved that modern F1 betrayals happen at Twitter speed when he publicly rejected his own team's announcement in real time. On August 2nd, 2022, Alpine proudly announced Piastri as their 2023 driver, probably expecting congratulations and maybe some champagne. Instead, just 2 hours later, Piastri replied on Twitter that he would not be driving for Alpine in 2023, and the paddock collectively lost its mind. This wasn't just awkward, this was public humiliation, with millions of witnesses watching Alpine get dumped via social media. The French team's announcement looked like a done deal until their own driver basically said thanks, but no thanks in front of the entire F1 world, creating the most embarrassing press release failure in recent memory. The drama highlighted the difference between public announcements and actual legal contracts. Alpine thought they owned Piastri's services based on their term sheet agreement, but McLaren had quietly signed him to a proper contract on July 4th, 2022, creating a legal mess that needed official arbitration. The Contract Recognition Board had to sort through competing agreements, reserve driver clauses, and enough legal paperwork to choke a lawyer. Alpine's case fell apart when the CRB ruled their terms. Sheet wasn't a valid contract due to its subject-to-contract wording, while McLaren's July agreement was rock solid. The CRB's ruling gave McLaren their new driver and left Alpine with egg on their face plus an empty race seat. This proved that in modern F1, paper beats press releases, and sometimes a single tweet can destroy months of planning and millions of dollars in assumptions. But Piastri's public contract drama was nothing compared to the ongoing mystery surrounding some drivers' secret escape clauses. These stories prove that Formula One runs on a simple equation: talent plus opportunity minus loyalty equals championship success. After dozens of white-knuckle betrayals, we've learned that contracts are just expensive suggestions, and team loyalty lasts exactly as long as your current deal. The pattern is crystal clear. Drivers who prioritize their own careers over wounded Italian pride and team family values are the ones lifting trophies. Whether it's secret midnight negotiations, public Twitter rejections, or straight-up ignoring team orders, self-interest beats sentiment every single time. So next time you see an F1 driver talking about loyalty and family values, just remember they're probably already negotiating with 3 other teams while smiling for the cameras. If one of these felt like a betrayal you'd have cheered, tell me which in the comments. And if you want more of this ridiculous F1 drama, like and subscribe, because this sport never runs out of backstabbing material.